John, thank you very much for agreeing to come here and have this conversation for the first session after the opening of what I think will be a brilliant day for the US-India Conference for All India Management Association.
Well, this is my favorite topic in the world. As those of you who know me, I believe the most strategic relationship in the world between any two countries is between India and the US. And so to say this is my favorite topic would be an understatement.
I actually just said that in the beginning when I opened that we've had a love-hate relationship for many years. But in the last 20 years or so, we've actually realized that these two countries are more alike than any other.
Yes.
Literally. There are no two other countries on this planet which are more similar, and there's no reason why we should not be doing more together.
Completely agree.
So, ladies and gentlemen, what I thought we would do is, while I have this conversation with John, I'll talk a little bit about him, ask him a few questions, and then we will open it up to the audience for your questions and comments. And we will try and close this. We have an hour, right? Who's minding the time here? An hour? Okay. So just give us a heads up when we are getting close to time. So John,
you just stand up. You go like this, Tom. You'll get used to my sense of humor.
So John, you have been a legend in business, industry, economy, and commerce. You built the plumbing on which the rest of the world runs this amazing digital economy. And you didn't just build it, you built this against odds. In your own childhood, you were dyslexic, I believe, and you overcame that, because many people believe kids who have a problem will get left behind. But you've demonstrated that it doesn't matter, that you can address any challenge in your life, any problem in your life, and come out ahead. Obviously, it needs determination and a certain kind of spirit that you have demonstrated. So tell us a little bit about how you handled some of the challenges in your younger days.
Well, you know, it's interesting. How many of you in the room are parents? Okay, so you know where I'm going with this. Everyone likes to talk about successful leaders, and it's exciting having grown a company from 70 million to $48 billion and 400 people to 75,000 people, and you've done those type of numbers with your companies. But I believe you're more a product as a leader of how you handled your challenges than you are your successes. And the reason I ask about you as parents, you're proud when your child scores a goal in soccer or they get a good grade in school. And you help them understand how they deal with success. But what you really worry about is how do they handle their setbacks, either in their personal lives or others. And if you could navigate through their first setbacks, you would do that in a second. So I think we're more a product of how do we handle our challenges than our successes. I didn't used to talk about dyslexia because it is hard. My hands sweat even today just with the mention of the word. But I found that it's so important because so many people have kids or they themselves are dyslexic, and they think if you have a challenge in life, you never have a chance to play at a different level. What I learned through spatial education, and this is before dyslexia was even understood, Mrs. Anderson, a teacher, taught me how to do it. You take a weakness, you make a strength. And once you overcome that, then you realize you can do that in any way in life. Once you overcome that, I've never made fun of anybody else in life, because once you've had a weakness where you read and other people laugh at you because you can't read, I read backwards, you don't make fun of other people unless they're very good friends and you can tease them. But it is that learning curve. And I announced the dyslexia by mistake. I would take our children to work day, and a young girl, there were about 500 people in the room, asked a question. She couldn't get the question out. And she said, I've got a learning disability and I'm dyslexic. And she started to cry and left. And I can still get choked up about it talking today. But as she walked away, I followed her off the stage and talked to her and said, I'm dyslexic too. And I said, here's how you deal with it. Here's the way. You're never going to do things serially, but you've got to picture the big picture. Say what you want to ask the question on, take a crack at it. And she asked the question, And then all of a sudden I realized the whole room was quiet because I had a lavalier mic on, and I disclosed to everybody my weakness. I don't know about that. So I was really worried. I went home saying it went too far.
I didn't mean to ask a difficult question.
But no, it was an important one to lead by example.
Thank you.
And so you have to be willing to say that everyone has challenges in life. And so sharing yours makes it more in touch, but it also is in business or in leadership, how you handle the setbacks. You never have a great leader, Jack Welch taught me this, until your company's had a near-death experience.
So I'm going to change gears a little bit.
Okay.
I'm going to make a few statements here.
All right.
Voice will be free. Video is the new voice. The Internet of Things will be bigger than the Internet. Market transitions wait for no one. France will become the startup nation in the world, in Europe, I'm sorry. India will be an amazing country and an economy. If you agree with everything I've said, then I've failed. By the way, these are not statements being made by John Chambers today. These were made by him over the years, many years ago, way before any of us realized that this was actually happening. So are you a futurologist, John?
No, in part because of that weakness about dyslexia, I've always been crowdsourcing from the very beginning. And what I do is pattern recognition. And so once I see patterns occurring, identify the market transitions, and then I'm able to play out that chess game very quickly to what the most likely outcome would be. And then I learned early on in leadership, you've got to be able to take your concepts, which are often complex in dealing with technology, and make them easy to understand. So you can imagine explaining to the service providers in the world, whether you're in India or the US, that 90% of their business and profits was going to be free. And they didn't exactly like what I said, but what I was trying to do is get them to realize if they didn't move on to video, if they didn't move on to the internet, if they didn't move on to being a technology provider, not just a transport of voice, they would fall behind. So it's connecting that data, and in part because I'm dyslexic, I can connect the dots really quickly. So you're able to say, Macron is going to win in France when nobody believed that he'd even run, much less win, and be able to see perhaps outcomes around the corner.
Wonderful. There's one more thing about you. You demonstrated amazing individual capability, capacity, and values. When most CEOs were flying on planes owned by companies, even when the companies couldn't afford it, you went ahead and bought an aircraft, but with your own money, yourselves. And I believe you're also super careful with how you use it. So, and you turned 10,000 millionaires out of your company. So what is it that makes you think about these things as an individual with responsibility more than most of us seem to demonstrate?
I came out of West Virginia, and my parents, who were both doctors, trained me very early about the importance of giving back. And those that have the opportunity to get an education, or those that have an opportunity for financial success, I believe owe an equal obligation to give back. And it's deep in my DNA and how I believe. And I could have kept a lot more of the options at Cisco, and instead of having 10,000 millionaires, just had 5,000. But that isn't what it's about. I believe you share success and you share the challenges. I knew every illness of every employee, their spouse or their children, that was life-threatening, and we were there for them like no one else. And I still get calls from people I helped 20 years ago that weren't supposed to live, but because we opened doors at hospitals, et cetera, or helped them through the tough times, we changed it. Now, what the correlation is, however, many people get confused. Corporate social responsibility, doing the right thing, is nice, but they often separate it from profits. They actually are intertwined. In every country in the world where I've been the top corporate social responsibility player, I've had #1 market share and the highest profitabilities. And in today's world, and we'll talk about later on startups, I'm focused not just on startups, and I hope that they're going to be very, very successful, and I'm setting unbelievably ambitious goals. I dream big, but I'm trying to say startups will be the job engine for the world, and don't just do it in Silicon Valley, do it across all 50 states, and make it inclusion. Do it across all 29 states and the 7 territories in India. Do it across France, where nobody thought it would be startup nation ever. And so I'm trying not just to do startups and be successful, I'm trying to generate jobs and really make it inclusion. And so again, if I do my job right, hopefully we'll be very successful in job creation and a model for others to do the same thing. And candidly, usually the profits come automatically if you do it right. So doing good and doing well, I think, actually go hand in hand. And I encourage people in the room to think about that. It's also important, in business in India, and especially now for high tech here in Silicon Valley, that tech can be for good or for bad. During the 90s and the first decade of 2000s, it was always for good. We have to get the image of technology back for good. And giving back is a huge part of it. So it can't be just about profits or ignoring the legitimate concerns of government or of citizens. You've got to say, how do we address the issues together on it? So I'm a huge believer in the combination of the two, and really what I'm defining is, I think, the next generation of capitalism.
You remind me a little bit about my dad, by the way. When we had 100,000 people in our system, he literally knew everybody and their families, each one of them. And he used to say that you can be good and do good at the same time.
Yes, you can.
And if you run a business efficiently...
And you saw the growth and you saw the profitability.
Yep,
on the plane issue that he was alluding to, that, however, was not one of my better decisions. We were all flying coach, and it made a difference of about $2 on the price of the share of the stock if everybody flew coach. And if anybody wanted to upgrade, they paid for it themselves. I did not think it was fair to ask my employees to fly coach if I wasn't going to do it, and if I was going to upgrade, including having a plane, that I ought to pay for it myself. And I was probably the only CEO in America who did that. It turned out nobody cared. And so I probably should have given away the money and let the company buy the plane. But it's kind of lessons learned making a difference.
Before we turn to India and startups,
okay.
I have a couple more. So what saved Cisco from this massive dot-com bust? We went through many challenges. You were like a machine. You were acquiring companies every other day. You were building this thing into some... Nobody imagined that this company would get to where it did.
Yes.
So what is it that you had learned? What is it you were doing differently from the competition, differently from your friends in the industry?
Yes.
What allowed this thing to become this amazing machine?
Well, we went through a decade of explosive growth, growing at 60 to 70% per year for a decade. And I mentioned the numbers, 400 people to, at that time, 40,000 people. Yep. We hit our forecasts each year, plus or minus 1 or 2%. We were that accurate on the data capturing and extrapolating out what did it mean. We were on top of the world. We were the most valuable company in the world for a very short time period. I wish we hadn't done that, but that's a separate topic. All of a sudden, we hit the dot-com bust. And we went, if you can imagine, from 70% growth in orders the first week in December to minus 30% in January. And 25% of my customers disappeared. Didn't stop ordering, disappeared forever. And it was free fall. And once I saw the data in January, obviously my own information systems had failed me because it didn't signal this. And so I went out and went on a 2-week tour around the world. And I came back, and on the way back, I realized that I was going to have to change the company dramatically. And I ran on the treadmill till 4 o'clock in the morning that night. I called up my executive team. We all got into the office by 6:30, and I said, we're going to restructure the company. We're going to take headcount down. This is a 100-year flood. Our survival is based upon this. And then it's classic for how you deal with a problem. You first say, was the problem largely self-inflicted, or was it market-inflicted? I felt that it was market-inflicted. By the way, the market did not agree when I announced it on it. And then I felt that our strategy was right. We'd seen the growth, so I was not going to make dramatic changes on the strategy, but I had to structure the company differently. And then I painted the picture for what we looked like later, both for our shareholders, our customers, and others. And we made all the changes in 51 days. And on day 52, we started gaining market share again. And our peers still did not think it was a problem. The press was still beating us up about, and how did you guys be so brilliant for a decade and now you're a bunch of idiots, especially the CEO. That's when leadership is lonely, and you have to navigate it through yourself. Yep. But we made the changes, and I'd like to say we just out-executed all of our competitors. What we did is we did the market transitions better than all of our competitors.
Well, that's a wonderful sign.
We had a bunch of them. They all crashed and burned.
Yep.
Or never came back to anywhere near their size. However, I learned, and this is important, you only want to make mistakes once. Yeah, and leaders, I expect them to take risks and make mistakes, just don't make the same one twice. So I had done what? I had the best data systems in the world. I knew where my orders are by the day compared to the same day a year ago, by where it was in the month based on where it was in the quarter, by what were the trends versus new growth rates. We could hit that forecast plus or minus 1 or 2% for the full year like no one else, including product introductions. I'd become too dependent on data. I had to have my finger on the pulse of the customers and see when there was a pulse that combined a nervousness with customers with a small blip in the data to all of a sudden connect the dots and be able to say, here's the outcome. So in 2007, all of a sudden we were cruising along, 50% growth again, bigger company, everything was back to normal. And all of a sudden, my top 8 banks in the US all slowed their ordering down in midsummer. Now that wasn't enough. We still overachieved our quarter. We had a great growth, but it was a warning signal. And I called up all 8 CEOs. They said, no, John, it's no problem. This isn't chance. So I felt there was a major problem in the US financial system. And I shared with the market that we saw a slowdown in these orders. It hadn't reflected in the rest of our business, but a slowdown in these orders. Again, my stock got hit pretty hard. We then made our changes ahead of time. And by mid-2008, when we were in the Great Recession ever, we were back growing and on top again. So I learned not just to trust data, but also to combine that with touching customers and see where you go. So it's that seeing around the corner, I think, in today's leadership, which is actually unfortunately accelerating. You've got to see things quicker. With social media, you don't have 3 weeks to respond. You've got like 1 hour. And as United Airlines found, it can be a huge problem.
Yep.
You've got to be able to mine the data out of social media before it occurs, as Wells Fargo found out on bogus accounts. And so learning how to communicate and, if you will, recognize data patterns becomes so important in the future.
So while on speed, what are the key differences right now with the current digital age, with everything moving at this rapid pace, compared to what was happening in the 1990s
and great question.
And that period, when you could make a decision at leisure? Yeah.
Yes. Well, in the 90s, it may not have been at leisure, but it was at a dramatic faster pace than traditional business. The internet was on an acceleration kick. It was changing every company's models. We didn't sell routers and switches. I sold transformation of business, changing the way the world works, lives, learns, and plays. However, today is 3 to 5 times faster.
Yep.
And this was a lesson learned for me that I used to view process as bureaucracy. And that's how most startups view it, and rightly so. And it slows you down. But I was wrong. If you do process right with innovation, with speed, then you can move with the speed that no one else does. And so I've always developed replicatable playbooks, if you will, or replicatable process that allow you to move fast. And instead of slowing you down, once you get it working well, you can move at the speed that no one else does. So at Cisco, we did 180 acquisitions. 2/3 of them were successful. We told the market that they're only going to be 2/3 successful. I still get beat up for the ones that are not, but that's just life. It's a portfolio play. But I could get a call on a Thursday night from the head of the NASDAQ stock exchange, and he was a good friend. He said, John, you usually are on top of your game. What are you thinking? I said, about what topic? I've learned with anybody, you don't tell them your problems. And he said, how come you're not buying this company? I said, I don't even know what they do. He said, your competitors are in there already. They've been in there for 6 to 12 months. This is going to be a $3 billion deal. It fits perfectly in your strategy, and you need to go do this. And I trusted him. I called up my business development person that night. The good news was he didn't know what the company did either. And he went over there the next morning to meet with the CEO at 8 o'clock. He called me at 9. He said, John, you got to get over here. I reviewed with the CEO what the business was, where they were going. I had a handshake at lunch to buy the company for $3.2 billion. We had it through both boards of directors, public announcement Monday morning. My competitors never knew what hit them. And it was unbelievably successful. but it's because we had that replicatable model of only acquiring in market transitions, only acquiring the number one or number two, only acquiring companies that have similar culture, only acquiring where you can keep the leaders and the top engineers because you're paying too much for them for their current product run rate. You've got to keep them to be able to get a faster product run rate. And because we do that so well, we move with speed that others do not. So that innovation playbook, whether it's digitizing a country like Prime Minister Modi is doing in India or like President Macron is doing in France, it's that playbook that allows you to move with speed as opposed to silos that aren't connected together. So one of the most important lessons I've learned, innovation is also about an innovative process and replicatable process, whether it's acquisitions or digitizing countries or attracting the best talent.
So let me come to India now, since this is the US-India conference today.
Yes,
one thing has got recognized that there's a lot going on in India in the startup space. We are now the second or third largest startup nation in the world. Mohan, is it second now?
Third.
It's still third.
China,
okay.
US,
But
China.
Yeah. And 33 billion has been spent in India in recent times in over 3,000 startups. Some of them, of course, already operational, and we had this big deal where Walmart spent 16 billion to acquire Flipkart recently. So it's getting noticed by the world. And you yourself have said there are 3 countries in which you would like to go and invest in startups, in the US, in France, and in India. Is that correct? Just 3?
That's correct.
And let me ask, other than my telling everybody, let me ask you, why do you think India is an interesting and attractive place for looking at growth, looking at startups, and looking at a nation which will make a difference?
It goes back to my approach on pattern recognition, and that is my strength. I have lots of weaknesses. We don't need to go into them today. But seeing trends and market trends before it's obvious to most people is what I got lucky on in life. And coming out of West Virginia and watching the trends from West Virginia when they were on top of the world and then went to number 48 out of 50 states, I'd seen that. Being at Wang Laboratories where they were on top of the world and then they went out of business, I'd seen that. So you compete against market transitions, not against competitors. Then you develop that replicatable pattern I talked about before, innovation playbook, for how do you determine what's going to happen on digitization countries or in startups. So when I look at startups, my playbook's very simple. The startups I'm going to get behind are first catching market transitions where business model and technology comes together. Second thing is a CEO that she or he really wants to be coached and knows what they know and knows what they don't, where I can really make a difference. I'm extremely aggressive on the goals. I don't invest in a startup that I think doesn't have a reasonable shot of being 1 or 2 in their industry, and I have no interest in being 2. And 40% market share is my target within it. I invest in startups where the customers tell me I should invest. Just like the NASDAQ told me I should buy the companies, almost every company I bought, my customers told me to buy. Same thing when I invest in startups. I go to their customers and say, what do you really think? And then I look at it. So I get a replicatable playbook. The same thing's true in countries. I invest in countries where there's a clear market transition going on. That's number one, that the citizens really buy into. Not a few, but the citizens in total. Then I bet on the leader. No surprise there. Jiang Zemin in China, 1995. Modi in India, 4 years ago. Macron in France, not when he became president, but when he was economic minister, and I called my wife up and I said, I just taught a class with him in an MBA school. I said, this guy's going to be a future president of France. And nobody in France believed it. And I'm not sure it was even his dream yet. But you could see the skills. And so you invest when you see those combinations occur. And that's what's occurring in India. Now, the important takeaway here, there's no entitlement. Silicon Valley could be Boston 128. Most of you don't know what I just said. Boston 128 was the Silicon Valley of the world just 30 years ago, 35 years ago. We didn't even know what Silicon Valley, couldn't even spell it. And today, there's not one major high-tech company left to set back on that. It used to be 1,000. So you got to earn. There's no entitlement. You either disrupt or you get disrupted. And India is disrupting. And it isn't a zero-sum game. It can raise all boats if done. The U.S., we are overconfident, bordering on arrogant. We have a 20-year low in our startup activity. that with digitization and the technology being done, part of them by the companies that I did before and part of them by new ones, we're going to destroy probably 20 to 40% of the jobs that exist today. And if you're bringing 25 to 30 million people into the workforce over this next decade, you've got to generate probably 50 million jobs. To do that with large companies not increasing headcount, actually decreasing them because of productivity, you've got to increase the number of startups by at least threefold, probably fivefold. We have no plan to do that. None. And it's scary. India, on the other hand, you are blessed with, I think, one of the top leaders in the world who has the courage to outline a vision that takes risks, everything from demonetization to goods and services tax, that truly, and I know this man very well, truly cares about every citizen in his country, which is rare. I mean, he wakes up each morning so focused on this. And he's able to outline a strategy for digitization and how it's inclusive, and he's willing to take the risk as long as he believes it's the right thing to do. He's fearless on it. So that's why I bet on India. Now, why I bet on our two countries? We are the logical two countries to work together, and we can help each other in a way that the oldest democracy and the largest democracy can do in the ways that we cannot. We should be the most strategic relationships in the world, from our startups to our business community, et cetera. And that takes people who are willing to take risk, because there are going to be setbacks along the way. And when the setbacks occur, then the critics come out and say, what were you thinking, et cetera. And I think our countries have to navigate through those challenges as you go forward.
So the opportunities in India right now are immense. We need more healthcare. We need more education. We need more social services. We need more manufacturing. So the field is wide open. And you invested, your family office invested, I believe, in 16 companies, and a couple of them in India.
2 in India, one's public, one will be announced coming up here in October.
Right. So would you like to up that number? Are there specific areas that you like to look at overall? And are there some areas of greater interest to you in India than others?
Yeah, but remember my key goal. If all I wanted to do was to make money and to generate jobs in one location, I'd stay here in Silicon Valley. I can back channel every person we recruit. I know the VCs backwards and forwards. They will give me not only the pick of the litter, I know how good they are in judging which horse I ought to bet on. But my goal is for it to become a startup world. And the problem, and you see it in America's voting pattern, is the middle part of America, the heartland, and the southeast are being left behind. The first time the American dream's not happening. Most parents in America know they will not be as well off as their parents were, and their children will not be as well off as them. And the only way you're going to address this is to change the startup engine and bring it across all 50 states. And the only way you're going to address 1.2 million jobs per month in India is for India to become the startup country of the world. And you have to blow past China because you have a lot more people coming into the workforce. And so to play a role in that with using the 2 examples going to 5, my 2 to 5 won't make a difference in the headcount. But it can be a model working with your government leaders that I really believe in, and working with each of the chief ministers, regardless of political party, to say, how can we do this in every state in India, and how can I be an example of how to do that? Doing the same thing in France, and I think we all understand. France is the worst place in the world to do business. I mean, the worst.
It is.
It's great to go there and have dinner, but don't put head count there. And in 3 years, it went from the worst place in Europe to do business to the best. Its startups, and I'm a huge believer in numbers, as many of my colleagues are here today, went from 140 high-tech startups per year, flatlined for 10 years, to 743 last year.
So let me segue from here.
Yes.
You are, and you ought to be a coach.
I love being a coach.
Yeah,
a teacher.
Because your experiences are absolutely amazing. What you've done yourselves, what you've seen happen.
And mistakes made.
And mistakes made. And incidentally, in our companies, we have a saying, we actually encourage everyone to make mistakes. There are only 2 conditions. You have to make new mistakes every year.
Yes.
And never repeat the same one. So
I'm going to steal your idea. I agree on the second one. I hadn't thought about pushing people to make mistakes, and I like making it simple. I want you to make new mistakes each year. Makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, that's my message to all the people in all the companies I'm involved with, actually.
Okay.
So obviously your learning can, should, and actually must be condensed. So you, I believe, have written a book. and which is not yet out. So
Yes.
what can you tell us about the book? I'm sorry, I'm not giving you folks to ask a question. I just have so much stuff to ask. So
Okay. Well, we'll do both.
Yeah.
I wrote the book. I thought a book should be written about once you're dead. And so I had zero interest writing a book. Dyslexia, it's hard for me to write. And so I did not want to do it. And it's like my first acquisition. If I'd known how hard it was, I wouldn't have done my first one. But yet, once you do it, you realize the value. I'm a teacher and a coach. And I wanted to share not the lessons learned looking backwards, but the lessons learned for what the future is in this new startup world. And whether that's an individual that leads a small 2 or 3 person organization, or in government, or a big company, or startups, I broke it into 13 chapters that teach about how do you learn to identify market transitions, how you do an innovation playbook, how you deal with the media, how you deal with good times, but also, most important, how you handle the bad times. How do you reinvent yourself? How do you get ready for the next chapter? So it's a book that's coming out here at the end of this month. Obviously, and you know this very well, you don't do this to make money because it slows you down. But it's my teaching book that I hope that people will say this is my go-to book whenever I have an issue on politics, or when I have an issue about how do you deal with setbacks, or I need to revisit a little bit, am I missing a market transition? And so, you know, it's my honor. I just got these books yesterday, and it's not available in general, but this is my first book I'm sharing. It's
Thank
for
you. Thank you very much.
Yeah. But what I'm after on this is how do you get something that really replicates that people can learn from? And so instead of me dealing with 16 startups, how do we do it on a much larger basis as you go forward?
John, the photographer wants us to stand and get a picture with this book.
Okay.
If you will, for a moment.
Sure.
There you
Thanks.
go.
Why is the first dot blue?
It's the conclusion. So you connect
you.
the dots to make the prediction voice will be free. You connect the dots to say India will be the next China. You connect the dots to say France will become the startup nation in Europe. You connect the dots that if voice is going over the internet and data is primarily what went over the internet, voice is such a small load on the internet that the new challengers will give it away for free. So therefore, voice will be free, business models have to change. So it's how do you connect those dots? How do you get a process for identifying the pattern recognition to then jump to the conclusion and be able to do it? So the conclusion is the blue dot. Does that make sense?
No.
So think about it, okay? So hang on, just stop there.
Blue.
No, hang on. Yeah. So,
Well, I have fun with colors. Blue's my favorite color.
so on that note, questions, anybody? But please try and keep it short and have a question mark at the end of your comment, if it is a comment, okay? Yes, please.
Yes, we've met before.
Yes.
India, can you talk a little bit, can you speak briefly in terms of India, your experiences for the benefit of others in terms of going into India, acquiring companies, starting companies, for both the positives and the cautions?
Sure. So
You want to take 2 or 3 together?
no, it's easier for me to do one if it's all right.
All right, that's fine.
Because I might confuse them. India, I've always had a very positive view of India because every person I ever met from India was really smart. And some of my friends from India said, well, John, you're only seeing our top 10%. I'm not sure I agree with that, but it's been amazing. I bet on India as our second world headquarters almost 2 decades ago at Cisco. However, I was too early. India was a great source of resources, but India was not at an inflection point to really grow and expand. Nor did it have the processes in place to move the nation, nor were the citizens ready for the change that needed to be done. China was what I bet on in 1995 at a time that no one else did. And I got that transition right. India has the youngest and best educated total workforce in the world, 600,000 engineers a year. And we need to make that more inclusive. You could feel the culture changing. And then when Prime Minister Modi got elected, I got a call from the U.S.-India Business Council and said, would you be our chairman? And I said, no, I don't believe in big committees like that. And then I thought, I am an idiot. If this is going to be the transition, and this is the leader who can do it, let's try to play a small role in helping it occur. And then as I did that, I gathered the data, and then I saw the numbers. And then it was easy for me to go, India will be the top growth economy for the next decade. Everybody said, no way, China's going to blow it away. I said, no, it won't. Just watch what happens. India will double the per capita income for their citizens every 10 years, and maybe every 7. Everybody said, no, it's not going to happen. And they're going to try to do it in an inclusive way, not just where 90% of the venture capital goes into, literally, unfortunately, 6 cities, trying to say, how do you do this on a much broader basis? Does it have lots of risk? Oh, yeah. Chances of success, lots of bumps along the way, and there'll be setbacks, and the minute setbacks occur, all the critics will come out and say, see, I told you. But if I were betting on one country in the world right now, it's India you bet on.
Preeta, hang on.
John, I come from a healthcare background. So
You've been unbelievably successful with a number of hospitals and everything else.
We're trying. So what are your inputs on our recent Modi Care, which is the world's largest insurance program and promises to be? What do you think as challenges and the opportunities for the startups and businesses? There's a lot of excitement and
Yes.
there is trepidation, so
Yes.
your inputs would be greatly valuable.
In case you're aware of or not, this is going to touch 500 million people. It's a
Yes.
new healthcare program announced by the government of India.
Yes.
And popularly it's being called Modi Care.
Okay.
And it's just been launched.
So the first time I met with Prime Minister Modi and we talked about the 11 planks that he was probably going to use for a digital India, healthcare was one of them. And he knew that he had to go in a sequence, but keep the picture of not each of these being individuals, but how they came together in total. Because you can't do healthcare without infrastructure and technology. And you can't do it without smart cities. You can't do it without changing the education system. You can't do it without startups, as you alluded to. Also, it's very important, one of the hardest things to do as a leader is as a young leader, you think you have to know everything. You don't. So it's important to say when you don't know a topic real well, I know the concepts here well. I think it is a very logical move to say, how do we bring this across the nation? And I think you have to solve the healthcare problem in a way that Europe did not and the US did not. Because with the number of people, if you don't do it differently, you will leave people behind on it. And so I like the concept a lot. I'm not as familiar with the elements. If you ask me about digital India, I know that one cold. If you ask me about manufacturing in India, I know that one cold. Startups. The healthcare one I only know concepts on. But my initial reaction based on what I've seen is it's a very logical move. Again, there are going to be risks, and you've got to dream big. You know, if you think about it, people dream too small. And the great leaders of the world, Shimon Peres, always taught me to dream bigger. And my regret in my time at Cisco, and I won't repeat it in my startups, I need to even dream bigger. Even though many critics would say I dreamed too big, took too much risk, I go the other way. And you've got to be willing for setbacks along the way. So I like the concept a lot. I think you have to address it in mass in India. It's just too much volume if you don't do it differently. Does that make sense? Do you believe in it? Let me ask. This is the fun thing. I get to ask questions too. Do you believe it's the right move for India?
I think it's a great move for India, and it will have challenges. But 10 years from today, it will 10 times more exponentially grow the access for people to have.
Gotcha.
The gentleman here, please.
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much, John and Sundar. I come from healthcare AI as well. My question to you, both of you, is India typically in the IT sector has been more on the services side. Now, with all the advantages of promises of AI and robotic process automations, that can be leapfrogged and you don't need services as much. Where do you see India's IT will go without proper product companies and patent protections?
Do you want to go first?
So actually,
now, one of the lessons learned, whenever you get a very tough question, you buy time, and you buy time not just for yourself, but for your peer. And so what I'm doing is distracting you while he thinks about the question. And then I'm also thinking about what's my answer going to be while he's giving his. And so that's one of the most basic deflection techniques in a tough question environment. So, Sunil.
So actually, first, it's a good question, because one of our challenges in India has been we are importing most of our hardware. it's not often realized that after oil imports, our second biggest import in India is electronic hardware. And there have been 2 attempts made over the last 20 years to build the hardware industry in India, or the smart manufacturing in India as well. And we looked at starting from 2 fab facilities first. Unfortunately, 2.5 attempts were made. Unfortunately, none of them worked. So now there is a new initiative which says, let's not wait only for the fab to get built. It's too big, takes too long, loses too much money, and unless government subsidizes it, it's not worked in any country in the world. The Indian government, incidentally, has agreed to subsidize it, but that's still, it's a 10 to 15-year journey. So it's saying, let's start at the assembly point and then move backwards. So we've started with assembling phones, for example. India is now the largest manufacturer of phone instruments in the world. There are, I forget the number now, and Mohan might know, or Akhil might know, the number of plants working right now. I think it's over 100.
123.
123, there you go. Assembling phones in India. Now, what they're doing is, they started just the assembly. Now they said, okay, let's start a little bit more value addition, then a little bit more. And as you know, programming and software writing was already a skill in India. So they're trying to combine the 2 now. So we are some distance away from where we need to be. But I think it's the right point at this for India to start to focus on both together.
So taking that one step beyond, because the good news is I've seen these movies so many times. I watched IBM on top of the world when I joined them in the mid-'70s, and then watched them lose their leadership, and they never came back.
Yep.
I watched Dr. Wang, the smartest man I've ever met in my life to this day. Invented magnetic core memory, walking across the Harvard quad. 32,000 people, when he missed the transition to the internet, lost their jobs. I've seen the transitions occur, and also the trending. I think India has a chance to be a manufacturing powerhouse, but you want to go where is the manufacturing that is going to have replication in it and volume.
Yep.
And so building that and having the goods and services tax, flattening the issue for logistics across the states was a must on the direction. You want to pick where the margins are. Manufacturing cell phones, pretty interesting. You were the largest manufacturer in the world of bicycles. It's something the country, if done right, can create a lot of jobs on. But you want to pick where the margins are going to be in the growth. Manufacturing, not mobile phones, but manufacturing technology like routers and switches, not going to be a lot of margin there, or drones. So you want to go where the growth is in terms of the approach. Most of my startups are a combination of hardware and software, especially software on it. To the second part of the question about the services industry in India, I disagree with some of the critics on this. Services will always be an important part of delivering solutions. However, the services have to get closer to the technology trends to be able, the promise of digitization, for the 274,000 villages we're trying to bring the internet to and the power to in India. How do you do this? And services can play a key role. I've always found that services combined with technology have higher margins than together than either one would do by themselves. So I do believe the services industry in India needs to reinvent itself and evolve. And if you don't, you get left behind. That's true of any company. But I actually think they will come together. To the question on AI, that would be an exception. I think the government has to focus on artificial intelligence. Digitization, there are lots of opportunities for what you manufacture or not. But if you watch what I think China clearly understands and the U.S. is learning, artificial intelligence is too important part of a country's leadership to not play a role there. So I think it's very important India focus on artificial intelligence and the fab plans to go with it.
So India is doing some interesting stuff. We built this platform called the India Stack. Completely voluntary effort from Indians from California, Indians in India together. I believe it's the world's largest and the most efficient system built so far of its kind, on which you can have multiple services ride. It's an open platform, and you can have payment services, you can have security services, and all run in a secure environment. A new one being considered now is for healthcare, to the point that Preeta made. How do you build such a large system? You obviously need a strong foundation. So there is some of that work being done, which will allow us to catapult and jump a few stages of development in the future. We have to keep at it, though. The difficult thing is you tend to lose steam when you go along these things because it doesn't happen tomorrow.
Yes, but I think the lesson learned, you and I grew up at a time where linear thinking worked. You do it 3 to 5% better.
Yep.
You can do it over 10 years. Those days are gone forever.
Yeah.
You leapfrog or you get left behind. You take the risk or you get left behind. You have to move before you have all the answers. You have to be willing to make that one mistake a year in each of your groups. And often society, and especially the media, is not prepared for that, nor are politics, as you're seeing in the US. And so it's how do you really adjust to this new pace, and how do you make it inclusive that becomes key? It's a great question.
Question.
So John, you're a man of seeing the dots and seeing trends in the future. So what is your take on blockchain and cryptocurrency? Because with India's potential, Digital India program and the potential that of investment, technology, software, jobs, and also on, that has the potential of changing the way we perceive economy, markets, business, etc.
Yes.
So two things. So two questions I have is that really happening the way that they projected? There's one side, there's a lot of believers in this. Then they have the feds of the different countries that are vigorously rejecting, kind of, putting, holding that back.
Yes.
What's your take on that? So how fast and is it really happening the way we expect it to see?
Thank you.
So this is another, I think, great question. Is it's so predictable in technology. We always get too excited too quickly. Then about the time we give up on it, then the elbow happens. Now, there are a few exceptions, but that's pretty typical in terms of the trends. Cryptocurrency and blockchain, I think, are important elements of technology, but they're not the foundation. I think both of them have tremendous capabilities and transformation. And when you think about cryptocurrency, I think what your prime minister did in a weekend, and it was full of risk. And I hope I would have had the courage, if he asked me, should have you done it, for me to say yes. I didn't know he was going to do it ahead of time, although I quickly became one of the strongest outside supporters. You digitized your economy in a weekend with a little bit of pain. So I think for India to be involved in both those areas is important. But I think it's more important for your total digitization effort. How do you bring this to life in digital manufacturing? How do you bring it to life in education? How do you bring it to life in healthcare? How do you bring it to life in smart cities? And you combine these not as one is the answer. They're just elements of a digital world that we live in. If there's one element, however, I would want to be really good in, it would be connecting 500 billion devices with artificial intelligence to get the right information at the right time to the right person or machine to make the right decision. That one, I do believe, will be extremely, extremely valuable. And this is set up for India.
Okay.
Today, I'm going to...
Sorry. Go ahead.
An artificial intelligence engineer in America, a really good one, might cost you $1 million a year. Individual contributor. And you're watching a startup today. When I do a startup with artificial intelligence, first question I ask is, who are your top AI people? Everybody says they are, but this is where you've got to have really brilliant people. And when you find they've really got the top AI people from the right schools, that's when I bet. So it's an area that I think is important. Sorry.
Akhil. Akhil is heads up KPMG in India.
Great.
John, if you were to give one or two pieces of advice to Prime Minister Modi from outside in view, what would be those?
Suggestions, not advice. You have to be a bit careful here.
Well, it is interesting. Your Prime Minister is, I think, one of the top 3 leaders in the world, and one of the top 3 leaders I've ever met.
Yeah.
And I hold him in tremendous admiration. I think if he's given the chance to lead this country for a decade, he can accomplish things that haven't been accomplished almost since you became independent. And so I'm a believer, and I know the challenges are going to be huge, and I know that we could fail. The suggestions or thoughts, and you always do these, to where Sunil protected me there, I always make controversial suggestions behind the scenes, and you go debate back and forth. But I think that the suggestions that he would actually agree with is many people think he's moving too fast and India's moving too fast. I think you got to move faster. Yeah. The other suggestion is, and this is more directed to the business people, you have to get behind a realization that there'll be mistakes made and bumps along the way, and you've got to get your country to believe in this vision. And this is where actually the media can play a huge role. Do you know who was the most supportive in France of the digitization of the country? It was the media. And I was shocked because the French media is extremely critical. But yet they grasped this could change the country. They grasped the students were ready for this. They grasped it was time for France to be an entrepreneur nation again. It was their word, was entrepreneurism. And they were ready to make the risk. So I think it's important the media unite behind this as well.
You are absolutely right. India has done more reform in 3 years than in 30 years. And by the way, we've done a lot in 30 years.
Yes.
Yes, sir. And the young lady at the back. Yeah.
Yeah, my name is Upendra, and John, I have seen you many, many times. Wonderful content, always mesmerizing. Munjal Sahab, you remember 40 odd years back, in a marriage in India, the 3 things would be given to the bridegroom, you know.
One used to be a bicycle, by the way.
Bicycle,
Yeah.
made by Hero,
Yeah.
HMT watch,
Yeah.
and Murphy radio.
Correct.
You remember? People from India probably remember that.
Yeah.
Murphy is completely out. You have invented, reinvented, and there's a huge opportunity. Electronic vehicle is another wave coming in India. From a lens of an industrialist, how do you see the growth for inclusive growth I'm talking about? I come from a village, you know, farmer's land, right? So when the land is taken over for the development of the nation, why they are left out from the inclusive growth? Because when you take over the land, right?
Okay.
These
I got the
guys
question.
given.
Yep.
Let me respond. I'm trying to get everything in.
I can take a crack.
This is
I
a
actually
superb
know this
question.
one
Go
pretty
ahead.
well.
Go ahead.
This
It's
is the same
this is a very
question
important
for
question,
every
by the way.
country in the world.
Yep.
The U.S. is in the exact same opportunity and challenge. If the inclusion is just Silicon Valley, Austin, Texas, and New York, we're going to have political unrest. And you're going to have and have-nots that are going to make the digital divide look small. And so it has to be addressed and it has to be inclusive. Your leadership and your prime minister gets that. And it has to be across 29 states and 7 territories. And you've got to have the courage to do it. It starts with a national plan. We're the only country in the world, in the U.S., we don't have a digitization plan for our country. Your country does. Then off the plan, what are the elements that have to occur? And if you don't address them in combination, as opposed to serially, you're not going to achieve it. You have to get a startup nation across all of your states. You have to change your education system, and it's got to be much more inclusive. It can't just be your top 20% of your population getting a reasonable education. You've got to realize that if you combine smart cities with education, with startups, with a vision for a country, then it can become very inclusive. And then you put your chief ministers in competition in a fun way, regardless of political party.
Which you started, by the way.
Yes,
Yeah.
and you let them sort through it. So I think the country's headed in the right way. I like a healthy give and take in terms of the overall approach to politics that go with it.
This is a very important consideration for India. For India to develop, the rural India and the rural economy has to develop.
Yes.
Because most of India lives there. And there are 2 reasons we need to do it. One is defensive, that if you don't, that'll go down the tube and India cannot develop. And on the flip side, if you do, and I'm saying if you even look at it, forget the human angle, which is absolutely, absolutely critical, even if you look at it purely in economic terms, that is the single largest potential growth market in the world.
Yes, it is.
68% of 1.3 billion people lives there.
Yes.
Just imagine if you can turn this around, what consumption, what market, what growth you can get will be bigger growth than you can get in Europe or in North America.
So you're already going to be the fastest growing economy in the world at 7%.
Yep.
I think if you digitize the country, you make it inclusive,
Yep.
double digits are within your grasp, sustainable, maybe
Yep.
for a decade.
Yep. Yes, please.
Hello, my name is Tanya Tandon. I'm a undergraduate student at UC Berkeley. You mentioned only acquiring companies with a similar culture, and we know Cisco is known for their leadership in CSR and sustainability. Recently, Modi ji in 2013 introduced the Companies Bill, which encourages CSR through philanthropy in the top companies in India. How else can we establish CSR in India, not only with startups, but SMEs as well, and implement CSR and sustainability in the long run? And what are the potential benefits for CSR in India, and where is that intersection between politics and CSR?
Simple question, it'll take me about one sentence. A little bit of humor. It's the right questions to be asking. And Sunil and I actually had this conversation backstage about it's so important that those companies and groups in India that are successful give back and do it on a larger scale. More consistent. Your company's always done it, but you're the exception, and it needs to be more of a general rule. The second issue is, and this is a little bit controversial, I think our generation did not do as good a job as we needed to in this area, especially on inclusion of gender and individual groups. I think the millennials will solve this. And that's where all the job creation is going to occur. Small business, startups, and growing. And the one company, Unifor, that I am public about, that I've invested in, and a brilliant young CEO and a mesh, and he is really good. He started a program about a year and a half ago after we had gone back and forth on issues of just requiring one female to be interviewed for every job opening. He didn't give out any quotas, didn't do anything else. Wonderful. And he went from 24% gender diverse to 34% in 14 months. So I think the millennials is where you correct this issue, both on corporate social responsibility, but especially on inclusion, and that's where the jobs are going to be.
Fantastic. So I'll just take a minute on this. I'm sorry, no more. We have to wind up now. We won't take any more questions, but I will respond to this. So while we were doing things ourselves, John, and also some of our, I have to say, many of our friends in industry were doing it, but it was considered a very Indian thing not to talk about it. So on behalf of Indian industry, actually I was the president of CII in that year.
Yes.
So I stood up on behalf of all of industry and told the government this is not okay. You should not pass legislation which forces company, and many of them will be tempted to fudge their numbers and fudge their books. Or they might write things they're already doing as training, employee benefits as CSR. But I have to admit I was completely wrong. There is absolutely fantastic work going on right now. For the girl child, for the disadvantaged, for access to villages, for clean drinking water. There is some amazing work that companies are doing. Not all of them, but many of them are doing a fantastic job. And I think it's been a very good move for India as a nation. But you're right, we do need, more of us need to do more of this.
But it's the same comment about dyslexia.
Yep.
Why do I talk about it?
Yep.
Because people see that you can overcome it. If you talk about it being an important part of your vision and others are examples, and you're very profitable, they see why that occurs too.
So I actually did have Madeleine Olson from the United Nations come and twist my arm. She said, you must talk about this. And I'm sorry, we don't. This culturally, in India, it's considered bad to talk about yourself and things you do because you give anonymously. You don't publicize it. And she said, no, for the very same reason. She said, you need to talk about it because not enough people are doing it. Others who look at these entities and these people as examples need to see that this is a good thing to do. And it pays back. I mean, you cannot even calculate the goodwill that you generate. It's immeasurable. It's absolutely amazing impact. So I had promised Rekha yesterday that this would be the best session in the entire conference. I told Solomon this will be a great conference, and this will be the best session. And I think I was absolutely right. Would you guys agree with me? I want you to leave us with one more. So that's the advantage of having somebody like John here. So I want you to leave us with one comment. Solomon, you need to give me half a minute more. So just in your mind, a lesson, because it's difficult to get access to people like yourselves. It's not easy because I also see some students here, and I see entrepreneurs here, I see professional managers, I see academics. It's a wonderfully diverse group here who has interest on the relationship between India and the US. And you are uniquely positioned at this juncture right now to address this. So if there's one lesson that you would want to leave behind for the audience of mistakes that we might make that we should avoid, or something that you should do, either one, I'll leave that for you.
I think you need to do what I need to do as well. I think you need to dream bigger. And about the time you think you're getting uncomfortable, that you're dreaming too big, I want you to dream bigger than that. The way you lead is to have the courage of your dreams, and my regret is I need to dream even larger. So that would be my one takeaway.
Wonderful, thank you. And thank you for this. I really appreciate this. Thanks. Oh, John.
Yeah, we'll take it.